let's not talk about my relationship to post-internet.
What's your background in art?
Well, I got into it while I was studying something else, which was cinematography for film in Prague, and because I come from a film family, and it was because I was more like active in various other things that were getting closer and closer towards fine arts and towards the community and the culture scene in Prague. At the time I was doing sort of like what you would call internet art. Many of the people involved in the scene and sort of my friends were in Berlin, so I thought, yeah, let's give this a try. Went from Prague to UDK in Berlin and then to Städteschule. And the school was more like a platform for me to have a permit, because at the time, like, Czech was not in the EU for 6 years yet, which was like a rule by Germany that you won't get a work permit until your country has been in the EU for 6 years and so on. So it was much more like a pragmatic decision than being like, oh, I really want to be at an art school or something. Of course, then it sounds like strange that you would be saying like, yeah, I was like an internet artist, so I needed to move to this other city where all these internet artists are sitting. But then, of course, you want some sort of like a face-to-face exchange. And
from looking at your work from the outside, at least, does this sort of like relationship or oscillation or like negotiation between systems and like more sort of like a more complex idea of media, where sort of like looking at media kind of like focuses on like a material of trying to encapsulate that in an object, for example, or a body or a performance? Is that the sort of process that you would recognize?
This, what you're describing, I think is more like an effect of me often trying to find a lot of theoretical critique of things that I'm interested in, and like spending my own time on trying to figure out what I think about the topic I'm working on or the phenomena I'm working with and so on. But then at the very end, I don't feel like I want to have an output that would be like a written text and then being present. Like somehow, like the reason why I started Publishing House was, for example, exactly this tension. Like at the end, I often end up with like a lot of information or a lot of ideas that are sort of great to mediate, but maybe in the form that I at the end enjoy the most, which is still like the artwork. They might be sometimes just like too heavy or like not heavy, like, but they would maybe like sort of take this artwork into like an illustration of it or somehow bound it too much. One of the reasons why I started the publishing house was actually, besides being genuinely interested in the format of a book or publication as an email or publication as anything else, it was suddenly like, okay, if I really need to mediate some sort of direct idea in the sense of like verbalizing it or like wanting to discuss it on this platform of like clearly defined criticism or something, I can maybe just leave it for the books. And then in my actual practice, I can work with the experience of all this knowledge.
Kind of wanted to ask about sort of labor and technologies, sort of thinking about like the sort of the figure or the act of labor in relation to technologies, the artwork specifically and the explorations that kind of like connect to those artworks. So be interested to hear a bit about your interest in, say, sleep.
Yeah, I mean, like I often feel like I'm like most of the time researching things that actually are like relating to work conditions. It comes a lot together with interest in metabolism and circadian rhythms and this way of how people sort of progress to be able to sustain productive in these conditions that we are describing, that are maybe like 24/7 communication or like working with other people that are in different time zones and different places and being reachable through communication, like anytime, any day, wherever you are. When I moved to Berlin, at the time I was mostly interested in like the habits we have with the using of internet and with Web 2.0 and with like suddenly like new social media platforms and with YouTube and all these other things, more than the aesthetical side of all these services and so on. And by now I'm mostly interested in sort of a continuation in that sense, that it is, again, like relating to communication and then to like work conditions that are actually so much affected by the way we communicate these days and so on. So these things kind of like relate to me, and then often this human body is often like sort of there, very present at the end. When I work with this like SAD lamps, like these lamps that are made to treat seasonal affective disorder, which is something that we would think like, okay, if you're depressed in winter or you're tired in winter, you sort of need help, you need to cheer up, or like, just sit in front of this lamp 15 minutes in the morning and you will feel great. It is still sort of like a recent phenomena for a small part of the planet, that you have enough food and enough energy sources in winter and so on. And like, you can be sad and you can be depressed in winter because of the workplace conditions.
I suppose it was interesting to hear like how you were kind of drawing on that workforce in a way, but kind of interfacing with this like total corporate body and this sort of like the company and the entity that it is, but also the people who sort of like are there producing that body as workers.
It has been like an interest of mine for a while before I got that offer. And there's this one really nice documentary that is called The Corporation. And actually one of the main things that it's focused on is exactly showing that it's really difficult to deal with the two levels of corporations. So like when you look at them as an entity, or like even like in some countries within law as like one body, they have one character, but then if you start meeting actual participants, then you start realizing, oh, many of them can be actually quite nice people, or many of them can even agree with my opinions. And so that was like one of the reasons why I said yes. We're sort of trying to look at them not as like employers of this one specific corporation with its history and problems, but more like as a little bit like a model situation. So like people who work in a structure that is really global. So they're sort of working across the time zones and across the geographic map. Of course, that's also like very limited what we could have learned from them or get to know from them or like ask them and stuff.
Did you feel like an empathy with them?
The one I was in touch with is somebody who was like really interested in art, for example, and like used to work in the hospital, in the laboratory for many years and so on in Switzerland, and is like a guy with 2 kids and was just like a really nice person and like really great to talk to. And so in that sense, yeah, I had sympathy with him, but for example, I could not have sympathy with the workplace. Sometimes you also just get fascinated by the object that represents. At some point, what started to be more interesting for me is works that are hard to document, and they sort of really demand your physical body to be in the space with them. But at the very same time, I don't like the fact how limited and prestige that becomes. With my work, I often try to focus on a specific thing. When I use myself in performances or something, I just try to be somehow like bringing an actual person there to prove that it's real or to prove that it's actually happening. I think that like things like Gotthard, like when I ran through this like 17 kilometers long road tunnel, I had like all these very clear reasons in my head why I want to run through this very specific tunnel, because I knew what it means historically and culturally for like the Swiss population, and what it also means for a lot of other things as a like engineering thing, like the 3rd longest road tunnel in the world and so on. And then it goes through this, and it goes through Alps, so it goes through this like massive mountainhood, and that's sort of like on this like symbolic level that, compared to like the achievement I had to fulfill in these 17 kilometers, 33 degrees Celsius, and like almost completely alone there and so on. Like all these things, they start making sense, and they're maybe somehow like separated on one level. And on the other hand, what I do often is that I want these kind of contexts to collapse or see what happens when they meet. And this kind of work, so like watching Martin Kohout, which took 10 months and so on, somehow those really affect me also as just like a normal person. And somehow this I appreciate a lot.
Hello. Shut up. Quiet, the video started. Hello. about for people who hate be.
And for me, running is in a way like accumulating this path by escaping. But it is necessary for you to cross them, or like to be present at them, to like bring yourself to all those one spots. If you would slow that down in some science fiction way, you would suddenly, and would have it like cut into these frames, you would see like this one body stretched as a snail or something. So it's a bit like marking the space by not actually leaving traces, almost like taking a piece of the space for myself by doing this action, by like submitting myself to the architecture that is so linear and so prescripted. Like you cannot like suddenly be like, oh, let's turn to the left here. No, it's more like, okay, I'll run in the center on the left side or on the right side, and that's it. By running through this, or like maybe inscribing myself into the history of the place through this, it feels like I gained some space there for me.